Most of us are one good deal away from finally replacing that worn-out rug, fixing up the backyard, or getting the bedroom we actually want. Good news, that deal's almost here. Wayfair's Black Friday and July sale. Get up to 80% off area rugs and up to 60% off outdoor and bedroom furniture. Shop Wayfair's huge selection of styles and find the piece to fit your style, budget, and space. Plus, free shipping. Black Friday and July ends July 27th. Shop today at wayfair.com.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
This is episode 430 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, I'm Casey Kaliba, a fight director. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend, Cassidy Cash.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
In Stratford Upon Avon, where William Shakespeare was born and grew up and lived and all his family was there. Obviously, they weren't the only family that lived there. And some of his neighboring houses survive still today. One particular house was about 8 miles away from William Shakespeare, and it was built in 1530 while King Henry VIII was ruling England. This house was there when Shakespeare was living in the town, and the owners have direct connections to Shakespeare himself. Today, the house is known as Wisson House, and the thoughtfully preserved historical property has been updated with modern amenities and is offered as a holiday property for anyone visiting the area or that loves Shakespeare. Of course, when I heard about the property, this wonderful blend of historical elements and air conditioning and things like that, I had to know more about it. And I am delighted to share this story with you today. We are welcoming Amanda Billingsley, the owner of Wisson House, to the show today to share the backstory of this property and what was happening there when Shakespeare was alive. Before we dive in today, I want to let you know that Amanda is offering us a virtual tour of Wisson House. In this guided virtual tour, Amanda will show us around the property, answer questions, and she's agreed to take questions directly from you, our listeners. You can get all the details on how to submit your questions and watch the full virtual tour inside the members area for That Shakespeare Life. Visit patreon.com/That Shakespeare Life for more information or click any of the membership buttons on our show notes page today. And now, let's find out more about this cool historic property. Hello, Amanda. Welcome to That Shakespeare Life.
Hello, delighted to be here.
How did you date this property to 1530 originally, and who was it that actually built this house?
Okay, so when I first moved here 20 years ago, there was a listing by Historic England that said it was 16th or early 17th century, and that was just based on an external view in 1967. But all they could have seen there under the render would have been the jetty. So since then, we had an architect here and a Historic England expert who then said they thought it would be the second half of the 15th century. That was during the Restoration period. The house does have a high proportion of timber to wattle and door panelling, which indicates that it's fairly early. And of course, the decorative carving, like chamfers and the stops on the carving, give you quite good clues as to what age you're talking about. So that's a mid-Tudor build date, particularly things like the pyramid stops on the chamfers. But the game changer was when I commissioned dendrochronology in 2019. So the tree ring dating is fantastic. Most of the house is elm, which cannot be tree ring dated because the wood grows too quickly and the rings are too far apart, but the roof trusses are oak. So a number of samples were taken. 5 of them were matched against a span of known tree rings dating from 1445 to 1529. And from that, the team confirmed that 3 of those timbers were felled in the spring of 1530 and the other 2 were compatible with that date. Now, this is an amazing resource. It's the Vernacular Architecture Group. It's a local hub for building archaeology. They do surveys. They pull all this together on timber frame and stone structures. And we're in good company. So they have dated Shakespeare School, 1417 to 18, Moated Manor House, Baddesley Clinton, 1458 or so, Anne Hathaway's cottage, Palmer's Farm, Mary Arden's house, Hallscroft. I think these are places that will be familiar to listeners.
Absolutely, they are. What good company to keep, and how fascinating that they can. I didn't know that about elm, that it grew too fast to be tree ring dated. How neat. Once you had Wisson Hill dated to the mid 16th century, how did you determine who actually built it to start with?
So, as well as the evidence from the house and the surveys about how old the house is and who built it, I also commissioned a documentary history of the house from Dr. Nat Alcock in 2019. So he found a document which refers to the sale by Mr. Bushell to the Peytons in 1589. And interestingly, I was able to trace back and find the Bushell family, and Thomas Bushell's will of 1558 lists property in Barton. So we've got that evidence coming from two directions. So that was 1558. If the house was built in 1530, then who built it? Well, Thomas Bushell bequeathed his property in Barton to his two grandsons. Well, the property in Barton to one of his grandsons, and the other grandson, Thomas, inherited the rest of the property. So this Thomas Bushell lived to be a very old man, 89 when he died from the records, and his son had died before him. So he had these two little boys to bring up. They were 1 and 3 when their father died. So I think that because Thomas Bushell was such an old chap by 1558, he probably did own the property and built the house, caused the house to be built in 1530. And if it wasn't him, it would have been a predecessor, and the Bushells have been in this area for hundreds of years. So why would a landowner build a quality farmhouse, and why would they invest that money? Well, they wanted to attract wealthy, productive farmers, maximise profits. A wealthy farmer, such as the Peytons, yeoman farmers, would have their own capital to invest in livestock and tools. They would improve land. There was this great period of rebuilding, and that basically substantial, well-built farmhouses were necessary during this time of change to meet the aspirations of families like the Peytons.
Well, so what parts of Wisson House then are original to the 16th century? You mentioned a bunch of different types of wood and places, but which parts that are there are still from Shakespeare's lifetime? So
the main 2-bay section is original to 1530. So that in the house that we've got now is the sitting room, the study that I'm sitting in, 2 of the bedrooms and the bathroom. So those are all part of that core 1530 block. And then there was a second round of building and modifications. So that we've got an inglenook fireplace. Some of the timber frame was turned stone cladding was effectively added. That's a crude way of putting it, but timber frame swapped out for coarse stone. Flagstone floors, and the cross wing that I'm sitting in with a large 4-flue chimney block. So that seems likely to also be 16th century. So the reason I say that is that there are mouldings on the fireplaces, doorways, and the seat in the inglenook, which are a particular overlow moulding, which was popular from sort of late 16th century, early 17th century. Also, I have to look at the likely range. So the Peyton family and I can come back to who built it and so on, but the Peytons who lived in it in 1589, when we get the first sort of real documentary evidence, they bought from their owners, the Bushell family then. So that seems like an interesting point at which changes might have been made. Then you've got the English Civil War from 1642. So this was a bad area to be in, contested battleground. If you weren't actually being hurt or your property destroyed, then heavy taxation and so on. Not much building went on then. And we know that the Peytons actually built themselves a new stone house in 1663, so just after that war ended. So they were doing okay. But it seems most likely that that significant stage of rebuilding happened at the end of the 16th century. Also, Dr. Moyer, who did the dendrochronology, said that although this cross wing is made of elm, so it couldn't be dated, but it seems likely to have been late 16th century. And also, we'll talk about the smoke bay, which was here in 1530, but they were becoming unpopular. They were smoky, messy, and by sort of between the 1540s and 1600, they were being phased out. So that's probably when there was this rush of new fancy brick fireplaces that came in. I'm also wondering, I've got a brew house, which I also think might be part of that same big sort of project.
Which is a separate building, or it's attached
Yeah,
to
it's a
Wisson?
separate
Okay.
stone building. It's been a bit of a poor relation, really, but it has been a wash house. It's got a washing copper in it, but there's all the evidence that it was a brew house, and farms had brew houses. And actually, I've got an amazing inventory from the end of the 18th century, giving a huge amount of detail. I mean, you'll like this as well, all the names of the horses and their ages and everything that was in every room and how much it was worth and so on. But actually, not an enormous amount changed up to that point. So the detail then, exactly what was in the brew house and so on, is very much relevant to what would have been around in Shakespeare's day.
So just as a short aside here for those of us that are not familiar with what a brew house is this correct that this would have been where they were brewing ale for their...
Exactly.
Okay.
Ale was a staple for the workers. Water wasn't that safe to drink. It was part of a farm workers' sort of due, I suppose. It was a weak ale generally. I'm not an expert in this area, but certainly a lot of ale got...
A part of a professional establishment would have been you needed one of these for the farm to run.
Yeah, there was a lot of ale got drunk. So there were women did it as a sideline. There were church ale houses, but certainly something as big as a farm with the kind of workforce they had, they needed to keep them going with plenty of the weak ale, which would have been what they drank.
You mentioned the documentation of the Bushnells, and I think I love the quote from Thomas Bushnell's will that included Wisson House, and it says he left his grandson, quote, aged 16, one stoned ambling horse called Old Button, end quote. Mm-hmm. Now, firstly, I love so much that we know the horse's name, and I shall look for an opportunity to call my next pet Old Button because I think that's fabulous. But why was a stone ambling horse such a unique and valuable gift?
Doesn't sound great, does it, really?
No, it sounds a little run down.
Yeah. So stoned means that it basically has its testicles. It's not been neutered. So it's a stallion. So, okay, that's one thing. Ambler, it's a 4-beat pace, which is very comfortable traveling long distances. So anyone who's spent much time on a horse will know that trotting is not much fun. Ambling, which is just a lovely sort of slow canter, is really nice. Imagine your purring engine, effectively. So I see it as basically a Range Rover. If you were a landowner and you had property all over several counties and you needed to get around them, you spent a lot of time in the saddle, and having a strong, smooth horse would be absolutely great. Now, why would you have a stallion? I can only assume, because I have read that neutered males are just as strong. A bit of testosterone, they're harder to handle, a bit of prancing around and snorting. And so maybe that's a little bit of showing off. But the will that came from is absolutely extraordinary. So this is Thomas Bushell, who died in 1558, had a huge estate, but his will sheds light on his religious leanings. He had an entire illegitimate family, the way he left property to his servants. And some of the servants had his own family name, which is interesting. And this was all in the year that Elizabeth I came to the throne of England. So really interesting. And there were 9 horses specifically mentioned. So there were 3 load horses, a grey trotting colt, a black ambling nag that was a stray, he specifies, a great bay ambling gelding, and a sorrel chestnut ambling splayed mare. Now, splayed, neutered mare. And I'm thinking, okay, how did you do that in Tudor times? And I looked it up and it said it was rare, dangerous and brutal. So I didn't look any further.
Oh, that sounds wise. Yes, I don't think I would want to know the details there either. How scary.
Yeah.
I wonder if an ambling horse is the same thing as what we call a gaited horse today.
It might be.
I think that might be similar. Anyway, You mentioned that in 1589, when the house was transferred to the Pattons, that the Pattons actually had been living there on the property before they owned it. Can you explain for us how this ownership-tenant relationship worked?
Yeah, well, we're really lucky to have that document from 1589, which actually specifies who was the tenant, because that's quite unusual. So Barton would have been farmed on an open field system until it was enclosed, where farms were basically pulled together. That was in 1777 in this village. But what it meant was that in the time we're talking about, there were fragmented strips of fields that were assigned. That was to mix up good and poor land. There would have been common grazing. The people farming the land would have needed to cooperate and coordinate. And the old calendars were really helpful with saints' days and so on for punctuating the farming year and when animals were allowed onto certain fields and so on. So I've mentioned that 1795 inventory, which it would have, that guy then, George Hurst, who died 1795, he would have farmed on that same system. So again, the detail from that is incredible. But in 1589, a new class of farmers were emerging. So they were producing for market, not just for subsistence. There had been some enclosure, some shift from arable to pastoral. The dissolution of the monasteries speeded that up, although there's some evidence that the owners of the bushel were involved in this. They recorded that they had taken land from the monasteries or had bought it effectively. And the Patons must have been flourishing as farmers because the Bushels wanted them to be their farmer. They'd built a, really good farmhouse and they wanted the best farmers available. So the tenant farmer paid rent to the owner, but the tenant was in charge of all the day-to-day work. And gentry basically had better things to do. So the analogy that I use in my mind is if you think of Jane Austen's novels and you hear references to, Mr. Darcy's worth however much a year. Well, this farm was worth in the 18th century documents £400 a year. So it would have been a bit less, but not necessarily a load less. But the rent to the owner was the important thing. And what the owner wanted was a farmer who could generate as much rent, add value to his property and get the best out of his asset.
In 1589, the Bushnell family sells the property to the Patons. So why did that occur?
These are really guesses. So they may have had a very good offer from the Patons. So they were established in the area. Sometimes landowners consolidated land through, say, marriage. So they might have ended up with little scraps of land here, big blocks there, small blocks, and they would sometimes sell off one area and so they could consolidate a big land ownership in another area. Now, there might have been pressure to sell. So we have two brothers who, they were the grandsons of Thomas Bushell, who inherited in 1558. And our grandson, Edward, the owner, he became a very conforming Protestant, but his brother Thomas was a Catholic and stuck to the Catholic faith. And he was what's known as a recusant. He was fined for not conforming to the faith. And those fines could be really hefty. So recusants sometimes had to sell off land. So that doesn't apply to this brother, but just as a bit of context, maybe the family were helping each other out.
As you're looking through the archives of the house, how did you find a connection of Wisson Hill with the Shakespeare family specifically?
I think the Patons is a longer shot. The Patons were yeomanry. They were yeoman farmers, exactly the same as Anne Hathaway's family. Shakespeare would have moved in their circle, whether he knew them or not. There weren't as many people around. He may have done. But the Bushells, there certainly was a connection. I think it's fair to say that Shakespeare sort of moved from the sort of yeomanry, middling sort class towards the gentry during his life. And so the sort of smoking gun we've got, the main connection is Richard Quiney's letter of 1598 to William Shakespeare asking for a loan of £30 with Thomas Bushell standing surety. So that at least means that the name Thomas Bushell would have been familiar. So this is the older grandson again.
Is this the same Richard? I mean, Quiney is a last name we know from Judith Quiney. Shakespeare's daughter had married a Quiney. Is Richard related to them? Is that the same family?
Yes, it is. Yes. So quite apart from the loan, you've got relationships by marriage. So let me get this right. Edward Bushell's niece, Eleanor, so that's our owner's niece, married Adrian Quiney, Richard Quiney's son. And Adrian was a colleague of William's father, John Shakespeare, in Stratford's corporation. And Adrian Quiney's third son, Thomas, married William Shakespeare's younger daughter, Judith, Hamlet's sister. So yes, in the same Warwickshire set.
Fantastic. So these are all friends and neighbors living together.
Absolutely.
Right there.
And people are happy to lend money, apparently, or provide surety anyway.
In terms of backstory on the house, you mentioned, and we've mentioned in passing, the Protestant versus Catholic challenges there. And one time in history where this really exploded was during the gunpowder plot, where it got really, really dangerous to have Catholic connections. Does the house itself have any records from what might have happened there during that time?
Well, we've got the connections through the owners. As I've said, we have this area to start off with. The English Midlands is where the sort of plotting happened. This is where the Catholic families were who were not happy with the change in the state religion. And the Bushell family were related by marriage to the Winters. So Thomas Bushell, one of the grandsons, married Elizabeth Winter, and she was actually the aunt of two of the gunpowder plotters. So Thomas and Robert Winter, who were executed. But that's not the full extent of it. And to be honest, I haven't really been through every combination, but the names that come up, Throckmortons and so many famous Catholic names from that time, they're all in the family trees of the Bushell family. One other connection we've got is that Thomas Winter, the plotter, did actually take out a lease of Barton tithes in 1600, so 5 years before the gunpowder plot. The tithes are, I find, quite difficult to understand, partly because I think I don't want to understand the unfairness of it all, but I see it as like buying futures. So it wasn't a direct connection, but it was a financial transaction involving this village. So there are those connections with the owners. Whether we will ever know what the Paytons thought as they sat in this house, farming and hearing about the plots and the changes in faith, I think probably we won't find out what that was. I think it was mixed. I've picked up bits of evidence locally and further away in terms of how ordinary people coped with that time. But I think the documents just aren't there.
Certainly a tense time, I think, for anyone. And it's exciting to think that all of these moments were going on, all, if walls could talk kind of moments of totally. Just think all the history that this building has seen. Now, we normally ask our guests here on That Shakespeare Life to share resources with us. And I think if you have some of those that we could look at, I'd love to hear about them. But I also would like you to tell us how we can visit Wisson House and be able to even stay at this property that has so much historical significance. Could you tell us about where we can learn more and how we can look to stay there next time we're in Stratford?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if you go to wissonhill.com, and I expect you'll put the link on your resources. This is where I've been putting, so the house history reports, the list of owners, the dendrochronology report, they are all there on the website. So you can find them there. In terms of resources, yes, again, go to the website and you can find out how you can stay here. It's available for weekly self-catering rental, and I'm very happy to advise with any local knowledge, help with planning and arrangements. But once you're in the house, there's a display of what I found during the restoration. So that includes the cores from the dendrochronology sampling, medieval pottery shards, clay pipes, the oyster shells from oysters that were commonly eaten. So everything that I found that relates to the history is there in a little display. And I have a little library. So I know we're going to talk about books, but everything that I have found relevant and interesting in a book, I've said, right, someone else might find that interesting. Let's put it in the little library.
That is fantastic. What wonderful resources. And yes, of course, we will link to the Wisson Hill website. If you're staying in Stratford, what a wonderful little piece of history to get to explore. We'll make sure that you can find that and stay there next time you visit. Well, Amanda, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible. So your choice would be in addition to those.
Okay, well, the book I've chosen is Ruth Goodman's Domestic Revolution. This is an amazing book which talks specifically about the shift from wood as a fuel to coal. And you think, okay, that sounds straightforward enough. Oh no, it changed everything. The food people ate, the recipes, the cooking equipment they used, the design of houses. So for example, wood smoke rises and it's quite comfortable to live underneath a sort of a haze of wood smoke near the ceiling, but it's not the same case with coal. Also, you can't actually roast with coal. You have to bake or boil things, and it just changed so much. The coal produces lots of sticky residues, so cleaning clothes changed. Had to use hot water and soap instead of cold water, and wood ash, and your furnishings and the way you decorated your house had to change. Just the whole lot. And it's also written by Ruth Goodman, who is, I don't know whether you've come across her, but she does a lot of real history. She lives in the kind of environments that she's writing about and tests everything. So she tests the recipes, she tests all the washing techniques.
Very hands-on history. How
very hands-on.
That is a wonderful choice. I love that. We'll link to this in the show notes as well. Well, Amanda, what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
Well, I still think there's more to go at with the documentary records. They are a bit thin on the ground through the 16th century, but I have identified some documents I want to go and see in the various records offices. You have to allow quite a lot of time to sift through huge bundles of raw material, but I'd also like to go and see the resting places of some of the figures we've talked about in the local parish churches. I ride my bike past them. I just haven't got round to going and having a look. And I'll certainly add more to my website as when I find any more of that out. I want to link the inhabitants with the local area. So really, as you say, if walls could talk, it's that whole thing of trying to say, well, they probably were, getting the harvest in or whatever, what kind of harvest at that time. Again, going back to that inventory that I've got from the 18th century, we know the names of the people who were doing what jobs in which fields and how much they were paid. And it just really brings it alive. So I'm going to try and get as much of that sort of onto the website and sharing it, but also sharing the house. Hopefully, more looking forward to having guests here and hopefully some people who can add to my knowledge. I often find people know more about the property or the period. Opening to the public. So Heritage Open Days in September. So having people having a look round and doing tours. And also I mentioned the brew house, which was actually the first part of the restoration project, but it's had no love or attention for 20 years. And so I'm looking forward to coming a full circle and getting that looking absolutely at its best.
What fun things happening at Wisson House. Thank you so much for being here today and helping us explore Wisson House and get this look into what life was like for Shakespeare's neighbors and understanding this part of his life in this really up close and real life way. It's really been a fun conversation, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you very much.
If you'd like to see images and historical illustrations about Wisson House and what it looked like in the 16th century when Shakespeare was around, you can visit the research vault for today's show. Find these at CassidyCash.com/episode 430 and click on any of the membership buttons you'll see there. Remember, if you want to come with us on the virtual tour of Wisson House, guided by Amanda Billingsley, be sure to join us as a member of That Shakespeare Society in our membership area. That's where the full virtual tour will be available. As always, more information on our guest and clickable links to the resources she recommends for you this week are available in the show notes at CassidyCash.com/episode 430. And if you'd like to add your voice to our conversation today, be sure to drop me a comment in the comment section and we'll chat some more there. Again, that URL for this week is CassidyCash.com/EP430. That's CassidyCash.com/EP430. That Shakespeare Life is written and produced by me, Cassidy Cash. Our audio engineer is Gary Mayholm. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.